The trucking industry in California is collapsing. Not because of a recession, not because of demand, but because the governor signed rules that made it impossible for independent truckers to operate legally. And the alarm bells are not just ringing anymore. They are screaming. This is happening right now. This is real. If you buy groceries, if you order anything online, if you live on the West Coast, you are already paying the price. You might not see it yet, but you will. I'm Brooklyn, and this channel exists to expose the stories the mainstream media ignores. We follow the evidence, not the headlines. If you want real reporting, hit subscribe. Hit the like button, because this needs to spread. Now I want to ask you something. Have you noticed prices going up on everyday items in the last year? Just comment yes or no. I want to hear from you because what I'm about to show you is connected to your wallet, your food, your life. Here is the thesis. California's governor pushed through a sweeping regulatory framework under the banner of progress, but the enforcement mechanisms crushed independent truckers, caused a mass exodus, and triggered a supply chain collapse that is now spreading across the entire western United States. This is not politics. This is math. This is incentives. This is infrastructure reality. And it is happening right now. Let's start at the beginning. In 2020, California passed a labor law designed to reclassify gig workers, forcing companies to treat contractors as employees. The goal sounded good on paper. Protections, benefits, healthcare. But hidden inside was a clause that would detonate the trucking industry 3 years later. The law used the ABC test, and Part B said if the worker's job is within the company's usual business, they cannot be independent. Translation: if you drive freight for a logistics company, you fail. You must become an employee. The trucking industry fought it in court. The California Trucking Association filed for an injunction, arguing the law violated federal protections for interstate commerce. For 2 years, the injunction held. Independent truckers kept driving. The system kept functioning. Then in June 2022, the Supreme Court declined to hear the case. Let that sink in. The legal shield disappeared overnight. AB 5 became enforceable against truckers. The clock started ticking. Within days, the Labor Commissioner announced audits and enforcement. Convert your drivers to employees or face penalties. And here's the problem. Most trucking companies cannot afford it. An independent owner-operator owns the truck, pays fuel, maintenance, insurance, tolls. They set schedules, bid jobs, and keep the profit. A typical owner-operator might gross $200,000 a year hauling containers from the port of Long Beach. After expenses, they net $70,000 to $90,000. Hard work, risky, but it's their business. Now if they become an employee, the company must provide the truck, cover fuel, payroll taxes, workers' compensation, benefits, overtime, meal breaks. The total cost can easily double. Most carriers operate on margins of 3 to 7%. They do not have the capital to absorb that increase. So what do? They stop operating in California. By late 2022, analysts tracked a sharp decline in owner-operators hauling in and out of California ports. Within 6 months, estimates suggested more than 15,000 independent truckers left the state, switched to routes avoiding California, or exited the industry entirely. Think about that. 15,000 trucks gone. Now, let's talk about what happens when you remove 15,000 trucks from the nation's busiest freight corridor. California ports handle over 40% of all containerized imports entering the United States. Those containers don't sit on docks. They need to be hauled to warehouses, rail yards, distribution centers. And who does that hauling? Independent owner-operators, Because big national carriers focus on long-haul routes, not the short, high-frequency drayage runs that move containers from port to warehouse. When those truckers disappear, capacity contracts. When capacity contracts, prices explode. By early 2023, drayage rates from the Port of Long Beach to warehouses spiked by 30 to 50%. Companies paying $350 per container were suddenly paying $500, $600, even $700 during peak periods. And those costs don't vanish. They get passed down to retailers, distributors, and ultimately to you. Let me give you a real example. A furniture importer in Orange County reported logistics costs rising by 42% in one quarter. They had no choice but to raise wholesale prices. Retailers raised retail prices. Families across the country paid 15 to 20% more for a couch or dining table, not because of tariffs or traditional inflation, but because California regulated thousands of truckers out of existence. But it gets worse, because the ripple doesn't stop at the border. California is the fifth largest economy in the world. It grows more than a third of the vegetables and two-thirds of fruits and nuts consumed in the United States. Those crops need trucks to reach processing plants and distribution hubs. Guess who hauls them? Independent owner-operators, small family-owned trucking companies with 2 or 3 trucks. These are not multinational corporations. These are people in Fresno, Bakersfield, Modesto. And they are being crushed. One owner-operator in Tulare County spoke to a trade publication in March 2023. He had hauled refrigerated produce for 22 years. He owned 2 trucks. He employed 1 driver. When AB 5 became enforceable, he was told he had 2 options: become an employee of a larger carrier and give up his trucks, or stop hauling in California. He chose to sell his trucks and retire early. He was 53. Multiply that story by thousands and you see the human cost. And that is only one example. Another trucker in the Central Valley told reporters he lost 60% of his income and his wife had to go back to work. They are now living in a smaller home, living month to month. That is the real cost. That is what happens when a policy is enforced without understanding the industry. This matters to you because those trucks carry your food. This matters to you because those trucks carry your medicine. This matters to you because your life depends on the supply chain. Now let's look at the domino effect. First domino, independent truckers exit the market. Second domino, hauling capacity drops and prices spike. Third domino, food producers and retailers face higher logistics costs and raise prices. But there is a fourth domino, and it is the one nobody expected. The large national carriers are not filling the gap. Why? Because California's labor laws make it expensive to base employees in the state. Overtime rules, meal and rest break penalties, workers' comp premiums, all among the highest in the nation. A major company can avoid that by routing freight through Nevada or Arizona and using out-of-state drivers for the final leg. It is less efficient, but cheaper and legally safer. So even the big guys avoid California. The result is a freight bottleneck unprecedented outside a pandemic or disaster. In spring 2023, shippers in the Central Valley reported wait times of 5 to 7 days to book a truck for a load that used to be picked up within 24 hours. Refrigerated loads of strawberries, lettuce, tomatoes sat in fields spoiling because there weren't enough trucks to move them. One strawberry grower in Salinas reported losing 30% of a harvest because trucks didn't arrive. 30%. Let that sink in. That is not a hiccup. That is a supply chain failure. And it is not just agriculture. It is construction materials, auto parts, medical supplies. Nearly everything moves on a truck. Now here is the irony. The stated goal of AB5 was to protect workers, ensure benefits, job security, healthcare. But the actual result has been to destroy the livelihoods of independent truckers who didn't want to be employees. They wanted to be business owners. They wanted autonomy, control, equity in their own equipment. And the law took that away. This is a classic collision of good intentions and economic reality. Policymakers in Sacramento assumed trucking companies would absorb the cost and convert drivers. They didn't account for razor-thin margins. They didn't account for capital requirements. They didn't account for the fact that many truckers would rather leave than give up independence. And now the entire state is paying the price. Now let's dig deeper, because there is another layer that reveals how broken the process is. In 2021, the California Air Resources Board passed a rule requiring medium and heavy-duty trucks to transition to zero-emission vehicles by 2036. Setting aside feasibility, here is the problem. You cannot comply with an electric truck mandate if you have been regulated out of business. The two policies are on a collision course. An electric Class 8 semi costs between $300,000 and $450,000, compared to $120,000 to $180,000 for diesel. An owner-operator who just scraped money together for one diesel truck is not going to afford an electric replacement, especially if they are forced to shut down. So what happens? Independent truckers disappear, and the only companies left are large carriers who can afford electric fleets, but those carriers avoid California due to labor laws. Do you see the paradox? California is pushing out the people who do the work, then demanding they buy equipment they cannot afford. It is policy by contradiction, and the victims are workers, consumers, and businesses caught in the middle. Now let's talk about the political response, because this is where the story gets infuriating. Governor Gavin Newsom has been largely silent on the trucking crisis. When pressed by reporters, his office released a statement defending AB5 as necessary to prevent exploitation and promising commitment to labor protections and environmental progress. No acknowledgement of capacity collapse, no acknowledgement of price spikes, no acknowledgement of 15,000 truckers who left. Meanwhile, the California Trucking Association and agricultural trade groups have been pleading for an exemption for owner-operators, similar to exemptions granted to real estate agents, doctors, and lawyers. But the legislature has refused. Why? Because labor unions that backed AB5, particularly the Teamsters, view independent truckers as a threat. If owner-operators exist, they compete with union drivers and weaken union leverage. The political calculus is simple. Unions have more power in Sacramento than truckers do. Truckers lose. This is not speculation. Union officials have said this publicly. In 2022, a Teamsters representative said their goal was to eliminate the independent contractor model in trucking because it undermines standards for all workers. Translation: we want everyone as employees to grow membership and power. You can agree or disagree with that goal, but the consequence is undeniable. The policy has crippled supply chains, driven up costs, destroyed small businesses, and made California less functional. And here is the kicker. The people suffering most are the workers the law was supposed to protect. Let me tell you about Maria Torres. She is a single mother of 3 in Riverside County. Her husband was an independent owner-operator, hauling containers out of Long Beach for 11 years. When AB5 became enforceable, he was offered a job as an employee driver for a large carrier. But the pay was 38% lower. The schedule was rigid. No flexibility for school pickups or emergencies. He took the job anyway because they needed income. Within 8 months, the strain was too much. They lost their home and moved in with Maria's parents. Her husband now works nights at a warehouse. That is the human cost. And there are thousands of families like hers. Now let's look at what happens next. This story is far from over. California is facing a budget deficit of nearly $38 billion. Tax revenues are down. The state is cutting spending. At the same time, the cost of enforcing AB 5, defending it in court, and managing the fallout is draining resources. Meanwhile, other states like Oregon, Washington, and New York are watching. Some consider similar laws. Others reject them, using California as a warning. The question is, will California reverse course or double down? As of now, there is no indication the governor or legislature will change the law. That means the exodus will continue. Capacity crunch will worsen. Prices will rise. The supply chain feeding the Western US will become more fragile, more expensive, more vulnerable to collapse. Here is the warning. California is not an island. What happens in California affects the entire country, because it is the gateway for nearly half of America's imports and a huge share of domestic food production. If the trucking industry in California continues to collapse, you will feel it. You are already feeling it. And it will get worse unless something changes. Here is the accountability question I want you to think about. If a policy destroys tens of thousands of small businesses, drives up prices for millions of families, and cripples critical infrastructure, but it aligns with powerful interest groups, is that good governance or corruption by another name? Here is the logic. California passed a labor law that reclassified independent truckers as employees. The law was challenged, but the Supreme Court let it stand. Thousands of owner-operators left the market. Trucking capacity collapsed. Prices spiked. Food spoiled. Supply chains buckled. The workers the law was supposed to protect lost their livelihoods. And the governor, backed by union allies, refuses to fix it. That is the chain. That is the cause and effect. And that is what is happening right now. Warning, warning, warning. The crisis is escalating. The supply chain is already cracking. The next shock could be a major shortage, a price explosion, or a collapse of critical goods delivery. This matters to you because your grocery bill will go up. This matters to you because your medicine could be delayed. This matters to you because your life depends on a functioning supply chain. Warning, warning, warning. The next time you see empty shelves or delayed delivery, don't blame the weather. Don't blame a temporary problem. This is policy. This is a direct consequence of decisions made in Sacramento. This is happening right now, and it is real. Now here is what I need you to do. Comment below and tell me if you have noticed price increases in the last year. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what is happening. Because the mainstream media is not covering this with the depth and urgency it deserves. The story is still being written. The decisions being made today will determine whether your furniture arrives on time, whether your groceries are affordable, whether your medicine gets delivered. This is not abstract. This is not partisan. This is real, and it is happening to all of us. Subscribe to this channel, because I will keep following this story. And remember, when the supply chain collapses, it is not just an economic problem. It is a crisis that hits your life,